Alright, so this happened a couple of years ago, and it still gives me the chills when I think about it. It was one of those late night drives, you know, the kind where you're just trying to clear your head. I'd been driving for a while, maybe an hour or so, just cruising down some back roads. It was way past midnight, and I was starting to get low on gas. I hadn't seen a gas station for miles, and I was starting to get a little nervous. Finally, I spotted a small gas station up ahead. It was one of those old, rundown ones you see in the middle of nowhere, with the flickering neon sign and all. The kind of place you wouldn't normally stop at unless you absolutely had to. But my fuel gauge was pretty much on empty, so I didn't have much of a choice. I pulled in and parked by one of the pumps. The place was completely deserted. No other cars, no attendants, just me and my car under the dim lights. As I got out of the car, I couldn't shake this weird feeling. It was too quiet. You know how even in the middle of the night you can usually hear some kind of noise? Crickets, wind, something? But there was nothing. Just dead silence. I shrugged it off and went to pay at the pump, but of course the card reader wasn't working, so I had to go inside to pay. Great. The gas station itself looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. The windows were covered in grime, and there was an old payphone hanging by the door. I pushed the door open, and this little bell jingled as I walked in. The inside was even creepier than the outside. It was dimly lit, with just a few flickering fluorescent lights. There were shelves of dusty snacks and drinks, but it didn't look like anyone had touched them in years. The place smelled stale, like a mix of old newspapers and cleaning supplies. There was no one at the counter. I stood there for a minute, looking around, waiting for someone to show up, but nobody came. I called out a couple of times, but there was no answer. I was starting to get annoyed, but I really needed gas, so I decided to just wait a little longer. After a few minutes, I heard footsteps coming from the back of the store. They were slow and deliberate, like whoever was coming was in no hurry. I expected to see some old guy shuffling out from the back office or something, but when the person finally appeared, it was this middle-aged woman. She looked completely normal, but there was something off about her. She had this blank expression on her face, like she was looking right through me. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and her movements were slow and stiff. She didn't say anything, just stood there behind the counter, staring at me. I cleared my throat and told her I needed to pay for gas. She didn't respond at first, just kept staring. Then, without saying a word, she reached under the counter and pulled out an old cash register. It was one of those ancient ones with the big buttons and the lever you have to pull to open the drawer. She put it on the counter and just stood there, waiting. I handed her a 20 and she took it without a word. She didn't even look at it, just stuffed it into the register and handed me some change. The whole time, she never took her eyes off me. It was like she was trying to memorize my face or something. I mumbled a thank you and quickly walked out of there, feeling her gaze on my back the whole way. I filled up my car as fast as I could, constantly glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see her standing in the doorway, still staring at me. But she never came out. The only thing I could see was her silhouette through the grimy window, standing there behind the counter, motionless. I got back in my car and pulled out of there as quickly as possible. As I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the gas station fading into the darkness. That's when I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. In one of the windows, I could see a face. It wasn't the woman from the counter, though. It was someone else, a man, and he was just standing there, watching me leave. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide open, just like the woman's. I don't know how I hadn't noticed him before, but it was like he'd appeared out of nowhere. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just some creepy coincidence. Maybe they were just weird, or maybe they were just messing with me. But as I drove down the road, I couldn't get that image out of my head. Those wide, staring eyes, watching me drive away. It felt like they were still watching me, even miles down the road. I kept driving, trying to put some distance between me and that place. But the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every now and then, I'd glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights behind me, but there was nothing, just the empty road stretching out behind me. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw another gas station up ahead. This one was more modern, well lit, and there were a few cars parked outside. I pulled in and parked, needing a minute to collect myself. I got out of the car and just stood there for a moment, taking deep breaths, trying to calm down. As I was standing there, I noticed one of the other customers was watching me. He was an older guy, maybe in his 60s, wearing a baseball cap. He was just standing by his truck, staring at me with this concerned look on his face. He walked over to me and asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine, just a little shaken up. He asked if I'd come from the road back there, and when I said yes, his expression changed. He got this serious look in his eyes and told me I was lucky. He said there used to be a gas station on that road, but it had been closed down for years. He didn't know why, but he'd heard stories about it. People disappearing, weird things happening. He told me I should stay away from that road, that it wasn't safe, especially at night. I didn't know what to say. I told him I had just been there, that I had gotten gas and everything. He just shook his head and told me to forget about it, to pretend like it never happened. He said sometimes, places like that have a way of coming back when they shouldn't, like they're stuck in time or something. I don't know if he was just trying to mess with me, or if he really believed what he was saying, but either way, it freaked me out even more. I thanked him and got back in my car, not wanting to think about it anymore. I drove the rest of the way home with the radio on full blast, trying to drown out my thoughts. I never went back to that road again, and I always make sure to fill up my tank before I go on long drives now. I don't know what I saw that night, or if any of it was real. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I was just tired and seeing things. But the memory of that gas station, of those staring eyes, still haunts me. It's like a bad dream that I can't wake up from. Sometimes, late at night when I'm driving, I'll think I see it again. Just for a split second, out of the corner of my eye, that old rundown gas station with its flickering neon sign. And every time I get this sinking feeling in my stomach, like I'm being watched, like someone is still out there, waiting for me to come back. So, yeah, that's my story. Maybe it sounds crazy, but it's the truth. And if you ever find yourself on a deserted road late at night, and you see a gas station that looks like it hasn't been touched in years, maybe think twice before stopping. You never know what you might find, or what might find you. Alright, so this happened about a year ago, and honestly, it's one of those things that still creeps me out whenever I think about it. It was a regular weeknight, nothing special going on. I was driving back home from visiting a friend who lives out of town. It was one of those long drives, and you know how it is. After a while, you start getting sleepy. I knew I needed to stop somewhere to get some coffee or a snack to wake myself up. The highway was pretty empty at that hour, maybe around 1 a.m. I finally saw a gas station sign up ahead, so I decided to pull over. This place was in the middle of nowhere, one of those old, rundown gas stations that you only see in horror movies. But at that point, I didn't care. I just needed something to keep me awake. I pulled into the parking lot, and the place looked almost abandoned. There was a single car parked on the other side of the lot, but I couldn't see anyone around. The lights inside the station were dim, flickering a bit. I parked my car and hesitated for a second, getting that weird feeling you get when something just doesn't feel right. But I shrugged it off. I was being paranoid. I just needed to grab a coffee and get back on the road. I walked inside, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. It was this mix of stale air and something else I couldn't quite place, almost like mold. The store was empty, no one at the counter, and it was deadly silent. I figured maybe the cashier was in the back or something, so I went straight to the coffee machine. As I was pouring myself a cup, I heard this faint rustling noise behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. Just a few shelves with random snacks and supplies. I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, it was late, and I was tired. I took a sip of the coffee, which tasted awful, by the way, and walked up to the counter to pay. Still, no one in sight. I leaned over the counter, trying to see if anyone was in the back. That's when I noticed this small, dingy door behind the counter, slightly ajar. It led to some kind of back room, and there was this dim, yellowish light coming from inside. I called out a couple of times, but no one answered. Just as I was about to leave a couple of bucks on the counter and head out, I heard it again. The rustling noise, but this time it was louder. It was coming from that back room. Now, I'm not usually one to get freaked out easily, but something about that sound just sent chills down my spine. It wasn't just rustling, though. There was this faint, muffled sound, almost like a whimper or someone crying softly. I couldn't make it out clearly, but it was enough to make me freeze in place. My gut was screaming at me to get out of there, but my curiosity got the better of me. I slowly walked around the counter towards the door. I was trying to be as quiet as possible, which felt ridiculous because the place was dead silent. As I got closer to the door, the sounds became clearer. It was definitely someone crying, mixed with these low, almost growling noises. My heart was pounding in my chest at this point, but I had to see what was going on. I pushed the door open a bit more, and it creaked loudly. I peered inside, and what I saw still haunts me. There was a small, cramped room, lit by a single flickering bulb. In the middle of the room, there was this man, sitting on the floor, his back to me. He was rocking back and forth, making those strange noises. His clothes were dirty and torn, and he had this wild, matted hair. But that wasn't the worst part. In front of him, on the floor, was a large cardboard box. The top was open, and I could see something moving inside it. It took me a second to realize what it was. There were small animals in the box, rats, maybe. The man was talking to them in this low, crooning voice, like he was comforting them. And then he did something that made my blood run cold. He reached into the box, picked up one of the rats, and just held it up to his face, staring at it. I must have made some kind of noise, maybe a gasp or something, because he suddenly turned around. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and he had this crazed look on his face. For a second, we just stared at each other. I didn't know what to do. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my feet were glued to the floor. Then he smiled, this slow, creepy smile that made my skin crawl. He stood up slowly, still holding the rat in his hand, and took a step towards me. I stumbled back, almost tripping over my own feet. That's when he spoke. His voice was low, raspy, like he hadn't used it in a long time. He said, "You shouldn't be here." That snapped me out of my frozen state. I turned and bolted out of there, not even bothering to look back. I ran to my car, my hands shaking so bad that I fumbled with the keys for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I managed to get the door open, jumped in, and locked it. I started the engine and tore out of that parking lot like my life depended on it. As I sped down the highway, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him running after me or something, but the road behind me was empty. I drove for miles, not even thinking about where I was going, just wanting to put as much distance between me and that gas station as possible. Eventually, I pulled into a rest area further down the highway. I parked and just sat there for a while, trying to calm down. My mind was racing, replaying what I'd seen over and over again. Who was that guy? What the hell was he doing back there with those rats? And why did he look at me like that? Like he was almost pleased that I saw him? I never got any answers. To this day, I have no idea what the deal was with that guy or that gas station. I tried looking it up later, out of some morbid curiosity, but there was nothing unusual about it online. Just a regular, albeit rundown gas station in the middle of nowhere. But every time I think about that night, I get this sick feeling in my stomach. I've driven by that stretch of highway a couple of times since then, but I always make sure to avoid that gas station. I don't know if that guy is still there, or if someone else has had a similar encounter, but I never want to find out. And now, every time I stop at a gas station late at night, I can't help but get a little paranoid, checking every corner, every shadow, just in case. The scariest part is how random it all was. It was just a normal night, just a random gas station stop, and then something like that happens. Makes you wonder how many other weird, creepy things happen every day that we just don't notice. And maybe it's better that way. Maybe it's better not to know. Alright, so this happened a couple of years ago, and it still gives me chills when I think about it. I was on a late night road trip, driving back home from visiting a friend in another city. It was one of those long stretches of highway with nothing but trees and darkness around, and I was running low on gas. I knew there was a gas station coming up, so I decided to stop and fill up before things got sketchy. It was around 1 a.m. and the road was deserted. I spotted the gas station sign up ahead, and I was relieved. It was one of those old, rundown places that look like they haven't been updated since the 80s. The lights were flickering, and there was this old neon sign that buzzed loudly, adding to the eerie vibe of the place. But I didn't have much choice, so I pulled in. There was only one other car there, parked near the convenience store entrance. It was an old sedan, kind of beat up, with no one inside that I could see. I got out of my car, glancing around. The place was dead silent except for the hum of the neon sign. No cars passing by, no crickets chirping, just this weird, unsettling quiet. I walked up to the pump and started filling up, trying to keep my mind from wandering into creepy territory. But then, I noticed something weird. The car parked near the store. It had this weird aura about it, like something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was enough to make me uneasy. As I was pumping gas, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked over and saw a guy coming out of the store. He was tall, wearing a hoodie pulled up over his head, so I couldn't see his face. He moved slowly, almost deliberately, and he was carrying what looked like a bag of chips and a soda. At first I thought he was just another traveler, but then he stopped halfway to his car and just stood there, facing my direction. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his eyes on me. It was the kind of stare that makes your skin crawl, you know? Like he was sizing me up or something. I tried to play it cool, not making eye contact, but I could feel my heart rate picking up. The pump clicked, signaling that my tank was full, but I didn't move. I just stood there, pretending to fumble with the nozzle, hoping he'd just get in his car and leave. But he didn't. He just stood there, staring. It felt like hours, but it was probably just a minute or two. Finally, he turned and walked back towards the store, but he didn't go inside. Instead, he disappeared around the side of the building. My gut told me to get the hell out of there, so I quickly put the nozzle back and got into my car. I was about to start the engine when I noticed something in the rearview mirror. There was another person standing at the edge of the gas station property, near the trees. It was too dark to see any details, but they were just standing there, completely still, watching. My blood ran cold. Who the hell stands in the middle of nowhere at this time of night, just watching a gas station? I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, or maybe someone taking a smoke break. But then I remembered the guy with the hoodie. What if he was waiting for something, or someone? I glanced back towards the store, and that's when I saw him again. He was peeking out from the side of the building, just enough for me to see part of his face. And he was smiling. Not a friendly smile, but this creepy, knowing grin that made my stomach turn. That was it. I started the car, ready to get the hell out of there. But as I was about to pull away, I noticed the second figure from the trees had moved closer. They were now standing near the entrance to the gas station, blocking my way out. My heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to do. There were two of them, and who knows if there were more hiding in the dark. I took a deep breath, trying to think rationally. I could try to drive around them, but what if they had a weapon or something? My eyes darted back to the store, and that's when I saw a third person inside, just standing behind the counter. How did I not see them before? They were just standing there, staring out the window at me, not moving. It was like a scene from a horror movie, and I was the clueless victim. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't just sit there and wait for them to make the first move. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to calm my nerves. Then, I did the only thing I could think of. I floored the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, and I swerved to the side, narrowly missing the figure standing at the entrance. As I sped past them, I caught a glimpse of their face in the headlights. It was another man, expressionless, eyes cold and empty. I didn't look back. I just kept driving, my hands shaking on the wheel. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Who were those people? What the hell were they doing at that gas station? And what would have happened if I hadn't left when I did? After what felt like hours of driving, I finally saw the lights of a more populated area. I pulled into the parking lot of a well-lit diner, my heart still pounding. I sat there for a few minutes trying to catch my breath and process everything. My first thought was to call the police, but what would I even say? There were some creepy people at a gas station. They'd probably just think I was being paranoid. I went inside the diner, more to be around people than anything else. The waitress gave me a curious look as I sat down, but I didn't say anything. I just ordered a coffee, hoping it would help calm my nerves. As I sat there, I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see one of those figures standing in the parking lot, watching me, but nothing happened. The rest of the night was uneventful, and after about an hour, I decided it was safe to continue my drive home. I got back in my car, still feeling uneasy, but a little more in control. I took the main roads the rest of the way, avoiding any more deserted highways or sketchy gas stations. I got home just before dawn, exhausted but too wired to sleep. I kept replaying the events in my head, trying to make sense of it. Was it some kind of setup? Were they planning to rob me, or worse? I'll never know for sure, and that's what bothers me the most, the not knowing. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I stopped at a gas station, I was on high alert, looking around for anything or anyone that seemed out of place. Even now, I still get a little tense when I have to stop for gas late at night. I've told a few friends about what happened, and most of them think it was just a bunch of weirdos trying to mess with me. But I don't think it was that simple. There was something sinister about those people, something that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the way they looked or acted, it was the way they made me feel, like I was in real danger. So, yeah, that's my story. Call me paranoid if you want, but I know what I felt that night, and I'll never forget the way those people looked at me, like they knew something I didn't. All I can say is be careful out there. You never know what kind of people you might run into, especially in the middle of nowhere at 1 a.m.